So the book continues with a lot of different static oligopoly models in this chapter, and I don't think we need to go through absolutely all of them. You can read through them. I won't make you be responsible for all of the math involved, but really what you want to do is sort of think about the takeaways here. And so one is the hoteling model, right? And remember that one is sort of our spatial differentiation model where we had the different hot dog stands on the beach or lemonade stands. And the key here is that as firms 1 and 2 move further apart along the beach, price competition falls and profits rise. And so what we end up is if firms can choose where they want to be on the beach, they're not going to be right next to each other like we would see in a median voter model. They're instead going to be farther apart, and that's going to depend on sort of the market size and the travel costs for the consumers. In the circular city model, right, the Salop model from Chapter 7, we see a very similar thing to Cournot in that price approaches marginal costs and profits decline towards zero as the number of competitors increase. And so remember, that was sort of about product differentiation on the circle. And so as more and more firms sort of fill that circle in, and you can get something much closer to your preferred type of product, but you can get another one that's really close by just traveling a little bit, price approaches marginal cost. And then they look at a Bertrand model with vertical differentiation. And remember that vertical differentiation we can generally think about as quality differences. And so they look at a high quality firm and a low quality firm. What they find in this model is that the high quality firm sells more output at a higher price, and generally will earn a higher profit as long as the fixed cost is not too great. And so remember, one reason that the firm might be higher quality is because they have a better production process, or maybe it's just about advertising, and so they have to spend a lot on their brand. If that costs a lot, then obviously their profits will be lower. But in this model, usually their profits are higher for the higher quality cost. And again, the principle of differentiation, prices and profits increase as the degree of product differentiation rises. Another model that they look at is the Cournot Bertrand model, where basically one firm is competing on quantity, right? So they're choosing Q1, and the other firm is choosing price, so they're choosing P2. I don't see necessarily a great purpose here, but what we can see is that this is the best response function for firm 2. This is the best response function for firm 1. So we get a not completely dissimilar equilibrium, to Cournot especially. But what we have, over here in the shaded area in the graph is the cartel region, meaning that if they could collude, this is where they would earn even higher profits than they would at the equilibrium. And so we saw that in the regular Bertrand model as well, that if you can collude and just keep increasing your prices, then you can earn higher profits, at least for a while. Now, one question is, all right, well, can firms just choose whether or not to have output or price competition? And so what we saw in our Cournot and Bertrand models is that Cournot firms earn a higher profit, have higher prices than in a Bertrand model. And so you would usually choose to compete with quantity rather than with price. And this is going to help explain some behaviors that we see in firms in terms of, saying either, this is how much I'm producing, making a public statement, or saying about how much productive capacity they have. And so that's going to be important. And of course, it's important to also remember that competition diminishes with product differentiation in both models. And so both models predict that firms will try to differentiate their products as much as possible. And that is definitely something that we see in the model. The duopoly model, when one is producing in output and one is competing in price, becomes asymmetric. And so it's a little bit different. But the firm that chooses to compete in output has a strategic advantage. And so when we think about the dynamic models in Chapter 11, we can think that a first mover may choose to compete in output, and then followers may have to try to compete based on price. And so, if you have the choice, generally, we could have firms choosing both to compete in output. That would just be our Cournot model. Both compete in price, that's a Bertrand model, or firm one choosing to compete in output, firm two choosing to compete in price, or vice versa. And what the book says is that most of the time, if firms have a choice, they will choose to compete in output because it's more profitable, right? Cournot is more profitable than Bertrand, and even in our mixed model, the output firm tended to be more profitable than the price firm. But there will be a few conditions under which price competition is more profitable. So one is when fixed costs associated with output competition are substantially higher. So because you are choosing to compete in output, you increase your fixed costs, that's going to be one reason you might not do it. When brands are differentiated vertically, right? So there's a quality differentiation, and it's sufficiently large, then you might choose to compete on price. And in a dynamic setting, the follower might be just as likely to compete in price as an output, right? So we said the leader is more likely to compete in output and sort of choose their output level, but the follower may choose either one, depending on how the model is set up. So there's lots of oligopoly models, and really sort of Cournot and Bertrand are the standards, but there's lots of versions of those. And in Chapter 11, what we'll look at is this sort of dynamic setting when one firm moves first and then another firm moves, right? And also thinking about potential entrants and things like that.